Welcome back. Today we'll visit the final resting places of some of history's most infamous criminals and gangsters. Let's discover their stories and where they were finally laid to rest. Let's begin. Al Capone died on January 25, 1947, at the age of 48. He was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery, Illinois. One of America's most notorious gangsters, he built a powerful crime empire during Prohibition and became a symbol of organized crime in Chicago. Lucky Luciano died on January 26, 1962, at the age of 64. He was buried at St. John Cemetery, New York. He helped create the modern American mafia and became one of the most influential organized crime leaders in history. John Gotti died on June 10, 2002, at the age of 61. He was buried at St. John Cemetery, New York. Known as the Teflon Don, he led the Gambino crime family and became famous for repeatedly avoiding convictions before his final imprisonment. Bugsy Siegel died on June 20, 1947, at the age of 41. He was buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, California. He played a major role in developing Las Vegas and became one of America's most famous mobsters before being assassinated. Meyer Lansky died on January 15, 1983, at the age of 80. He was buried at Mount Nebo Cemetery, Florida. Known as the mob's accountant, he managed the financial operations of organized crime and became one of the mafia's most influential figures. Frank Costello died on February 18, 1973, at the age of 82. He was buried at St. Michael's Cemetery, New York. He became famous as a powerful mafia boss who built strong political connections while leading organized crime. Carlo Gambino died on October 15, 1976, at the age of 74. He was buried at St. John Cemetery, New York. He led the Gambino crime family and was widely regarded as one of the most powerful mafia bosses in America. Sam Giancana died on June 19, 1975, at the age of 67. He was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery, Illinois. The Chicago mob boss was shot dead at his home shortly before he was expected to testify in a major investigation. Albert Anastasia died on October 25, 1957, at the age of 55. He was buried at St. John Cemetery, New York. Known as the Lord High Executioner, he was famously assassinated while sitting in a barber's chair. Joe Bonanno died on May 11, 2002, at the age of 97. He was buried at Holy Hope Cemetery, Arizona. He founded the Bonanno crime family and became one of the longest-living and most influential mafia bosses. Anthony Spilotro died on June 14, 1986, at the age of 48. He was buried at Queen of Heaven Catholic Cemetery, Illinois. He controlled Chicago mob operations in Las Vegas before being murdered by fellow mob members. Roy DeMeo died on January 10, 1983, at the age of 41. He was buried at St. John Cemetery, New York. A Gambino crime family captain, he became infamous for leading a crew linked to numerous murders before he was killed. Whitey Bulger died on October 30, 2018, at the age of 89. He was buried at St. Joseph Cemetery, Massachusetts. The Boston crime boss spent years as a fugitive before being captured and later killed in federal prison. Machine Gun Kelly died on July 18, 1954, at the age of 59. He was buried at Cottondale Cemetery, Texas. He became one of America's most famous gangsters after a high-profile kidnapping case and spent the rest of his life in prison. John Dillinger died on July 22, 1934, at the age of 31. He was buried at Crown Hill Cemetery, Indiana. One of America's most wanted bank robbers, he became famous for daring robberies and dramatic escapes before being shot by federal agents. Pretty Boy Floyd died on October 22, 1934, at the age of 30. He was buried at Akin Cemetery, Oklahoma. He robbed numerous banks during the Great Depression and became one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives before being killed. Babyface Nelson died on November 27, 1934, at the age of 25. He was buried at St. Joseph Catholic Cemetery, Illinois. A violent bank robber and murderer, he was killed after a fierce gun battle with FBI agents. Bonnie Parker died on May 23, 1934, at the age of 23. She was buried at Crown Hill Memorial Park, Texas. Along with Clyde Barrow, she became one of America's most famous outlaw partners before both were killed in a police ambush. Clyde Barrow died on May 23, 1934, at the age of 25. He was buried at Western Heights Cemetery, Texas. He led the infamous Bonnie and Clyde gang, carrying out robberies and murders before being ambushed by law enforcement. Arnold Rothstein died on November 6, 1928, at the age of 46. He was buried at Union Field Cemetery, New York. A powerful gambling boss, he became famous for his influence in organized crime and his suspected role in the 1919 World Series scandal. Mickey Cohen died on July 29, 1976, at the age of 62. He was buried at Hillside Memorial Park Cemetery, California. He controlled much of Los Angeles' organized crime and became one of America's most recognizable gangsters. Bugs Moran died on February 25, 1957, at the age of 65. He was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery, Illinois. Leader of Chicago's North Side Gang, he became famous after surviving the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Dean O'Banion died on November 10, 1924, at the age of 32. He was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery, Illinois. A Chicago gang leader, he was assassinated in his flower shop, triggering a violent gang war. Ronnie Kray died on March 17, 1995, at the age of 61. He was buried at Chingford Mount Cemetery, London, England. Along with his twin brother, he led one of London's most feared criminal gangs during the 1950s and 1960s. Frances Kray died on June 7, 1967, at the age of 23. She was buried at Chingford Mount Cemetery, London, England. She was the wife of Ronnie Kray and became widely known after her tragic death, which remained surrounded by controversy. Jack Spot died on December 21, 1958, at the age of 44. He was buried at Willesden Jewish Cemetery, London, England. A notorious London gangster, he became famous for his involvement in organized crime before dying from gunshot injuries. John Wesley Hardin died on August 19, 1895, at the age of 42. He was buried at Concordia Cemetery, Texas. One of the most notorious outlaws of the American Old West, he was linked to numerous killings before being shot dead in a saloon. Frank Nitti died on March 19, 1943, at the age of 57. He was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery, Illinois. A close associate of Al Capone, he became the head of the Chicago outfit before dying by suicide as he faced federal prosecution. Tony Accardo died on May 22, 1992, at the age of 86. He was buried at Queen of Heaven Catholic Cemetery, Illinois. He led the Chicago outfit for decades and became one of the longest-serving and most powerful mafia bosses in American history. Dutch Schultz died on October 24, 1935, at the age of 33. He was buried at Beth David Cemetery, New York. A notorious bootlegger and racketeer, he was fatally shot by rival gangsters during a power struggle in New York. Joe Masseria died on April 15, 1931, at the age of 48. He was buried at Calvary Cemetery, New York. A powerful mafia boss, he was murdered in a restaurant during the Castellamare-Reese War, changing the future of organized crime. Salvatore Maranzano died on September 10, 1931, at the age of 45. He was buried at St. John's Cemetery, New York. After briefly becoming the most powerful mafia leader in America, he was assassinated on the orders of rival gangsters. Joseph Colombo died on May 22, 1978, at the age of 54. He was buried at St. John's Cemetery, New York. Founder of the Italian-American Civil Rights League, he was also the boss of the Colombo crime family and died years after being shot. Tommy Luchis died on July 13, 1967, at the age of 67. He was buried at St. John's Cemetery, New York. He led the Lucchese crime family and became one of the most influential mafia bosses in the United States. Joe Profaci died on June 7, 1962, at the age of 64. He was buried at St. John's Cemetery, New York. He founded the Profaci crime family, later known as the Colombo family, and became one of the original leaders of the American Mafia. Carmine Galante died on July 12, 1979, at the age of 69. He was buried at St. John's Cemetery, New York. A powerful Bonanno crime family boss, he was assassinated while eating lunch at a restaurant in one of the Mafia's most famous hits. Carmine Persico died on March 7, 2019, at the age of 85. He was buried at St. John's Cemetery, New York. The longtime boss of the Colombo crime family, he continued to lead the organization even while serving decades in federal prison. Jack McGurn died on February 15, 1936, at the age of 34. He was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery, Illinois. A trusted enforcer for Al Capone, he was widely linked to the St. Valentine's Day massacre before being murdered by rival gangsters. Mickey Spillane died on May 13, 1977, at the age of 42. He was buried at St. Raymond Cemetery, New York. A powerful Hell's Kitchen gang leader, he controlled illegal gambling operations before being murdered during a gang power struggle. Oni Madden died on April 24, 1965, at the age of 73. He was buried at St. Raymond Cemetery, New York. A famous Prohibition-era gangster, he built a criminal empire through bootlegging, gambling, and organized crime. George Cornell died on February 25, 1937, at the age of 38. He was buried at East Ham Jewish Cemetery, London, England. A member of a rival London gang, he became famous after being shot dead by Ronnie Kray in one of Britain's most notorious gangland murders.